Well, I've known Jaden since he was in high school. I can remember sitting on a bus with him at the Elite 11. I guess it would be 2 Junes ago. And we're just kind of talking about life and what his interests are. And you could tell that while very reserved young man, he had an intensity about him and a willingness to go for it. And I think in big moments, in big games, we see freshmen a lot. They're a little scared, a little hesitant to go for it. And he hasn't. And I think the way this season is laid out for him, being injured, missing a game, natural bye weeks. They've just given him a break. Freshmen hit a wall. It's just natural and obvious. So I think he's been able to reset a couple times. And you think about this game, what I love about it probably more than anything is how Herm has developed and mentored him. And he said after the game, he pulled him along the sideline and said, "Hey, man, let's go win the game. Can you throw a touchdown pass?" And Jay said, "Yeah." And he goes, "All right, throw one." And he launched it. And what's beautiful is you nerd out on that pass. An expert would say, or the NFL expert or Bill Walsh would tell you that you want to throw it 42 and a half yards right outside of the screen. If you're watching it on the coach's cut up that I watch here at home, you referenced, and that's exactly what he did on the deep ball to Darby. So he played his best game in terms of throwing the deep ball.
So many questions last season, or last offseason, I should say, about who is going to replace N'Keal Harry. That question was pretty quickly answered with Brandon Ayuk and now Frank Darby. Just what can you say to the job that these two receivers have been able to do?
Yeah, well, kind of, you could tell Frank Darby was going to be a dude last year. You watch him, I got to call some of the games later on in the season, and you're just like, well, okay, like this is a guy who continues to rise up. Saw it even in the bowl game when N'Keal opted not to play. And when I talk to coaches around these conference calling games, they always reference him and how athletic and strong he is, specifically after the catch. I think he's best in the conference in terms of after he catches the ball, what he does with it. And you always knew Frank Darby could ride. I mean, the guy's always had wheels. Rob Likens has always referenced him as the best deep ball catcher on the team. He's just needed more and more opportunities, and kind of waiting for that breakout game for him. They found one. Even though it was week 13, it clearly happened, and he made the biggest plays of his life on the biggest stage.
Now, as we look forward to the Territorial Cup, how can this team, a young team that could ride it high or maybe coast a little bit this week, how can they use this huge win they had over Oregon and use it now against their rivals coming up again in Arizona?
Well, they're going to have to do two things. They're going to have to, one, kind of flush it and move on while kind of maintaining some of the momentum. And young teams often, I feel, can confuse momentum with false hype. And I think this team dealt with that earlier this year. They were a team riding high. I called a bunch of those games, and they were one of the top 20 teams in the country. And then they fell into hard times, right? And they went on that losing streak. So I'd imagine they've learned from that. I'm sure Herm Edwards has already addressed it with his team early this week about, what it's like to be a mature team. He gave them a couple days off. You saw the post-game speech. Don't come back until Tuesday. Well, I would hope, majority of those starters have already been in the building, watching film, preparing, getting their bodies right and their minds right versus reading their own stories on Instagram and reposting people's love for them, because you got to move on. Because the reality is Arizona, they've played one game this year where they've looked like the team we thought they could be with Khalil Tate. And that was Colorado. I called that game. They're due for another one, right? And in the final one of the season, I don't think that they fold. I don't think they put it in the can and say, let's just get this season over with. I think they come up and play their best ball, especially early on. So we know what rivalry games do. I just called one over the weekend with Cal Stanford. If you have success early, it carries over to other drives and spills over to other position groups. So that'll be the big thing for ASU. They've got to come out, flush it, move past a great win, and get dialed in for the rivalry game. And I think rivalry games usually afford teams the ability to focus well.
On the other side, with Arizona and Khalil Tate, most of the audience was introduced to Khalil a couple seasons ago when he played and rushed for so many yards against Colorado. He was a Heisman hopeful in 2018, but seems like he's never quite been able to put it together consistently with Kevin Sumlin. When Arizona fans think of Khalil Tate a few years down the road, what legacy do you think he's going to leave behind at Arizona?
What a great question. I think for him, he's got a chance. I felt he had a chance to be the best quarterback in recent history at that institution. And I think a lot of people would agree. I save every preseason Sports Illustrated, and I have the one under my desk here of him on the cover saying the nation's best quarterback. Clearly that didn't happen last year when he was injured. Clearly it hasn't happened this year with him splitting time with Grant Gunnell. And I don't think he's going to go down as one of the greats of all time, but I think they'll remember the explosive ability that he had. You know, I mean, he's not just a runner. I called the game 2 years ago in the Territorial Cup where he started off, I want to say 11 of 12 or something like that before getting injured right before the half and not playing in the second half of that ball game. So he's accurate with the ball. So I think for him and for that institution, they'd like to remember him as the guy who, put a blemish on Arizona State's season after the biggest win of the Herm Edwards era.
Yogi, we appreciate the time and the insight as always. Thanks for joining us.
Anytime, man.